Today's topic of discussion is cowardice behaviour. So if you look at today's society, right, there's a shortage of real masculine men. So there's a bunch of guys who are showing cowardice behaviour on a day-to-day basis. They ain't got no masculine frame, they ain't got no backbone, and they're just getting walked all over by women. So we're going to be discussing some key points in terms of why cowardice behaviour is a major turn-off for women and how to effectively navigate it. So first point is verbal. Now, guys who are watching this, you're going to come across certain guys in society, whether it's in your workplace, whether it's at home, whether it's in your gym, wherever. There's going to be certain people who just love to give verbal all day long. They're just like little chatterboxes. They just talk so much rubbish. Now, these guys here, right, they are quick to just open their mouth anytime they have a disagreement with someone. So let's say a guy and a girl are having a conversation, and then she says something that he disagrees with. He'll just quickly start having a back and forth with her, start arguing with her. That right there is lowering a woman's respect for that guy. Now you can equate that to cowardice behaviour. Reason being is because that guy doesn't have the ability to control his mouth. He's just all verbal. Another example is these social media influencers. Some of these guys, right, who are popular. Let's give an example. Someone like Andrew Tate. He goes on the internet, gives all of this verbal, can talk for hours on end, doesn't get tired. But when it comes to day-to-day activities, he needs 10 security guards to walk down the street. Now, a lot of these fangirls mistake that for confidence. Now, a guy who's confident within himself, do you think he's going to need 10 security guards around him to walk down the street? You know, there's a quote by Mike Tyson. He said it best. Greatness is not guarding yourself from the people. Greatness is being accepted by the people. You know, if you was to put, for example, let's say Andrew Tate against a boxer called Daniel Dubois. Now, some of you guys probably ain't heard of that boxer. So he's a heavyweight champion. And this guy here, right, he doesn't really talk much. But I guarantee you, I put money on this guy that he'd knock out Andrew Tate. Even though this guy here is just giving the most verbal, talking the most. You know, let's say, for example, Tyson Fury. That's going to be a popular name that some people know. He was doing the most talking, giving the most verbal, and then when he fought Usyk, he lost the first match and the second match. You know, if he was to just keep his mouth closed and was to actually show respect and to not, you know, hype himself up, trying to put himself on a pedestal, trying to think that he's superior to other people, and actually took his training seriously and his discipline and diet and so on, he would have actually had a better result. Now, he may have still lost, but it would have been a closer fight. Now, if you look at, for example, Conor McGregor, he's another example of a guy who's just been given so much verbal when he fought Habib. Now Habib, he still trained, kept his discipline, and did the least amount of talking. And then he focused on actually winning. Now if you look at, for example, social media now, the guys who seem to be blowing up on the internet are the guys who are doing the most verbal. People who are actually keeping themselves disciplined, they're doing actually less talking and more action. They're not being recognized. Now that's why the system is rigged in and of itself. The guys who are giving the most mouth, the guys who are giving the most verbal, these people here actually convince people that they are men of value. But deep down within themselves, they are cowards. Now in the fighting game, right, you can be a fighter but still be a coward at the same time. Now what do I mean by that? It means that if, for example, you got Floyd Mayweather, arguably one of the best pound for pound fighters in history. If you look at him outside of the boxing ring and him as a person, he is a sellout to money. He flipping sell his own mum for money. That guy here, he's a strong Zionist supporter, supports Israel, supports genocide, killing of innocent people across the world. Because of what? The paycheck. Because of money. That isn't attractive at all. That's why you see a bunch of these guys with low quality women. You'll never see them with high quality women. So next point is emotional. You'll see how a bunch of these guys who have got cowardice behaviour within them tend to be the most emotional. They can be just overreactive over the smallest of things. They'll get triggered over the smallest of details. Just lose their plot, lose their brain. How can that guy make a woman feel safe? She don't feel safe in that kind of environment. This guy here is just constantly all over the place. Erratic. Feminine energy. So when you have an actual civilized conversation with them, they get triggered and upset. Now some of you guys have probably come across certain guys like that, where you've given certain points, spoken about certain points, and because they are emotional, because they're so weak internally, they start to become overreactive. They start to give the most verbal. That's what I call them type of people. Them type of people are called fangirls. The fangirls are overreactive. That's why it's so important to be able to learn how to control your emotions. Working on yourself, day in, day out. No one's going to do this for you. Nobody's going to be able to give this to you. You can't buy it from the shop. You can't buy it from a course. You can't get it taught to you either. It's something which is going to need to be developed through life experience. You know, there's a guy, recent guy, bodybuilder, I think his name is Ashton or something like that. He must have raced a guy called Speedy, and then done a race with him. I think he bet about 60k to say that, oh, he's gonna win, and then he lost. So he lost in the race, and then he decided to race him 3 more times, and he lost all 4 of them, and he was still in denial. Reason being is because he couldn't control himself emotionally. Now, if you're not somebody who's able to control your emotions and be able to develop your emotional intelligence, you're going to end up making mistakes like that. So it wasn't just public humiliation, but it was a big detriment to his brand. You know, it tarnished his brand name. People don't respect him the same as they done before, because he couldn't accept his loss. You know, certain times in life, right, you're gonna take losses. You're gonna have to eat those losses. You know, if you start crying like a little baby, start, moaning, start going on about it over and over again, it's a turn off. And that's why these guys here, right, they start crying in front of their women. They start moaning in front of their women. You know, that's why these women, they say, oh, I want a guy who's emotional around me, and so on. What they mean by that is they want a guy who's emotionally stable. He's not moaning and complaining and crying in front of her every day. That's going to flip and turn her off. She's going to see that as this guy here is weak. So that guy Ashton Hall, he looks like he's got like 25-inch, 30-inch arms or something. But the way he reacted to his losses, it just shows there's deficiency internally. So next point is ideology. Right now, there's a war on ideologies. So what do I mean by that? So you've got rainbow community pushing hard, indoctrinating 4, 5, 6-year-old kids, trying to tell them it's okay for you to like the same gender. Scrap that. It's okay for you to like 100 genders, because apparently there aren't no limits on the amount of genders there are. Somebody can be like non-binary, somebody can be a lamppost, a flipping tree. That's what's happening right now in today's society. People are not actively pushing against this evil. They'd rather just stay silent. Now, people are getting programmed right now on a day-to-day basis. Every single day, through social media, through the school system, through universities, YouTube. That's why it's so important. You're going to need to unlearn all the information that you guys have learned about relationships. Actually sit down with yourselves and start to question, is this actually correct? Is me chasing after a woman, constantly messaging her, constantly phoning her, constantly trying to beg her. Does that work? The answer is no, it doesn't. A woman pulls away further. That's why it's so important to have your self-respect. Self-respect needs to come first in life. If a woman wants to fall in line and actually accept your viewpoints, even though she may disagree with them, it just shows she's got feminine qualities about her. She's somebody who's cooperative and submissive. Now that right there, in and of itself, is a characteristic that many women in today's time are lacking. Reason being is because they haven't had to work on that. They just get their way in life. So especially with these girls who are seen as pretty from the outside, they literally get special treatment from people. Now, so if they were to go into, let's say, the store, I've seen some of these women, they're literally like, oh, where's the apples? And then the guy's like, oh yeah, it's over there. You know, oh, I'm going to show you where it is. Someone said that to me, be like to them, down there. You know, that's what's happening right now with people. They get all this special treatment and then people are not saying anything. It's because of what? Cowardice behaviour. You know, somebody doesn't show respect, somebody doesn't show baseline communication, why bother even speaking to that individual? So, final point is, pencil, why not? Ignore. Now, you got a bunch of guys ignoring evil in the world, and when it comes to fighting against evil, these people here are nowhere to be seen. You know, so they want to hate on people who are actually trying to counteract the system and the indoctrination of the media and all these different ideologies. So they tell people, oh, just ignore that, you know, or just ignore feminism, ignore the rainbow community, ignore homosexuality, you know, just let people do what they want. It's okay. So somebody asks you a question and says to you, do you agree with the rainbow community? People are such cowards nowadays. They know within themselves that they are against it, and then they'll turn around and say, oh, it's up to the people, they can do what they want. You know, it's a free country. But the person asks you, do you agree with it or disagree with it? Now, a guy with strong principles, he'd straight tell the person, look, I disagree with it. You know, it's not acceptable. So, when you're even talking to, let's say, a woman, and she says something which you know is wrong, but yet you choose to ignore it, you're conditioning that woman to think it's okay, to think it's acceptable to give bad behavior. You know, if you just ignore that and you just think, oh yeah, no, she can just do what she wants, you end up like Will Smith. Complete emasculation mode. Now, you check the behavior, You tell her that's not acceptable, and then you do no contact. Don't just start ignoring women when they're showing bad behaviour, and then you're ignoring her when she's showing good behaviour. In her brain, she's just getting confused then. You need to utilize it anytime a woman is not trying to cooperate. And when you've told her this is what you want and she's still refusing, then you ignore her. Watch that last 10-15 seconds again. I don't need to repeat myself. So just to wrap up, verbal. The guys on the internet right now giving the most verbal, these are the people who are getting the most attention. Now the youngsters who are watching that, they start to see these people as role models. These people here aren't role models. These influencers and all these YouTubers. Now some of these guys have got millions and millions of subscribers and followers. Some of the content I look at and I see their videos, they're just talking a bunch of stupidness in them. Doing prank videos and so on. That's the world right now we're living in, where social media has literally destroyed people's mindsets. That would be the first thing I'd get rid of if I was in charge. Wipe out social media. People can't post no videos anymore. Go back to Stone Age. But it's not going to be happening. Next point after that was emotional. A bunch of guys nowadays are just so emotional. You can't even have a conversation with them. They literally have become like zombies. You tell them, 2 + 2 = 4. They'll be like, no it doesn't, it equals 5. There's certain videos out there where some people, they don't even know certain countries in the world. I was watching this one video. Some guy asked him, what's the capital of India? And then the dumb guy, he must have replied with Pakistan. People are just so brain dead nowadays. The next one after that was ideology. So right now there's a war on ideologies. People are really, really passive nowadays. They'd rather just sit on the sidelines. They don't want to actually talk out against evil. So right now people are seeing, let's say, with Israel and Palestine. How did it get to this point? Millions and millions of Palestinians, civilians, have been killed over the last 70, 80 years. It's because people chose to stay silent. Because they flipped it back on the people, saying, you're anti-Semitic if you talk out against it. And then people started to become brainwashed and thought, you're anti-Semitic for talking out against Zionism. Zionism right now is to literally control the world. And then the final point was ignore. The reason why guys nowadays are showing more and more cowardice behaviour is because they are ignoring evil that's happening in the world. They're letting it brush under the carpet. That's why these women don't respect none of these guys nowadays. A guy who's not actively talking out, trying to fight against his own temptations and desires and evil in the world, how is that guy ever going to be respected? That's why you got these red pill clowns talking about money, success, status and all these other things. When was the last time they actually talked about controlling their own desires and to stop fornicating with women? Nah, you ain't going to hear that from them. So there's a lack of good people left in the world. And that's why it's so important for the good people to unite, to come together. That's one of the main reasons why I created this channel. To bring back traditional moral values. So people who believe in traditional moral values answer into a higher being, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim or whoever. If you're somebody who believes in moral values, that right there is the most important thing in life. So I hope that makes sense, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.